Welcome to Werks. Today's video is a continuation of our trip through the New England and specifically Martha's Vineyard. We took a tour bus and the trip started and ended in Oak Bluffs. The guide was very informative and I highly recommend this tour by Oak Bluffs Land and Wharf Company. The prices were reasonable, and after taking the tour, I determined this was a great deal for the amount of history and knowledge presented.
That's kind of how the island works, but right here you can look at this beautiful horse property called the Tashmoo Farm. Beautiful estate back there. Now up here on the left, it's not as scenic, but a really interesting man used to own all this land on our left. His name was Craig Kingsbury. And Craig's an island legend. He was a charismatic storyteller. He was elected to office from time to time on the island. Real tough guy, macho guy. And to reinforce how tough he was, he never wore shoes. Summer or winter in New England. And he was a farmer and a fisherman. Craig got struck by lightning once. He said it hurt. Now, when the Jaws film crew came to the island, they were really taken with this guy, the salty island guy. And he and Robert Shaw became drinking buddies right away. Robert Shaw, of course, played Quint. So this movie version of Quint is largely influenced by Craig. The clothes that Robert Shaw wore when he filmed were Craig's clothes. And the mannerisms that Quint used were Craig's mannerisms. That's how Robert Shaw expressed the character. Now, over here on the left, you're going to see a 2-track road going over a hill. And that takes you up to Craig's homestead. He passed in the 80s, but I know that family very well. I've spent a lot of time in that house. There's a clipped out newspaper article in a picture frame that hangs in the living room up there. And it's an interview with Craig in the local paper. And they interviewed him right before he passed. The author gives him a wonderful description. He calls him a seaside philosopher and a barnyard statesman. Now, Steven Spielberg got a kick out of Craig and put him in the movie a couple places. Craig was not really much of an actor at all, but he did it anyway. The most famous scene that Craig is in, it's a nighttime scene. They come upon a fishing boat that's been attacked by the shark and sunk. And Richard Dreyfuss gets on his 1970 scuba gear, grabs an underwater flashlight, jumps in the water, goes under the water line of that boat to look at the damage, try to figure out what they're up against. I'm sure you guys remember this scene. Great big hole in the boat. Severed head of the fisherman floats out of the hole in the boat. Now you know what Craig Kingsbury looks like. It's a mask of his face. And that solved the acting problem right there. I can just imagine Spielberg saying, "Okay, Craig, I figured out a scene for you." But in that house, there's an old family album with 2 Polaroid pictures of that mask. Made it in the family album. Now, way back in 1602, we had an English explorer in this area. His name was Bartholomew Gosnold, and he discovered Martha's Vineyard. And I put that in air quotes because that was big news to the people who'd already lived here for 12,000 years, our Wampanoag neighbors who were still here. But he came ashore, he saw this forest and all these wonderful North American grapes. The famous Concord grape is named after his ship. Now, we're an island, surrounded by salt water, of course, because we're in the middle of the ocean, but we're on top of an aquifer here, so we have an abundance of fresh water. We have 60 freshwater ponds, and you'll notice as we go along how lush it is. Really an unusual setup. That's why those grapes were here. Gosnold had a couple Marthas in his life. He had an infant Martha and a mother-in-law Martha, so he named it Martha's Vineyard after the ladies and these wonderful grapes that he found. And a lot of people ask me usually their first time to the island, they'll ask me about wine tasting on Martha's Vineyard, meeting the winemakers and visiting the vineyards. And that sounds delightful, but we've never produced wine on Martha's Vineyard. And it's very disappointing to people. There's a family that tried. In the 70s and 80s, a family made a run at it. And there's an old joke in the wine business. They say, how do you make a small fortune in wine? Well, you start with a large fortune. You plant a bunch of grapevines, and you end up with a small fortune. So, they're hardworking folks. It just wasn't meant to be, for whatever reason. We have a great wine scene. It's just not local. We do have 2 breweries, microbreweries. We're going to go through our first up-island town here called West Tisbury. When we're talking to each other, we call it West Tis. And Tisbury and Chilmark, those town names come from southeast England, where the original pilgrims came from, our pilgrims. Of course, we have many Wampanoag names here. Now, over here on the right, we're going to get a glimpse of the second Kroning's grocery store. It's about half the size of that original one. The only reason I point it out is because it's the best place on the island to see celebrities. The rich and famous on Martha's Vineyard don't live in the towns. They live in the country. And that's the last grocery store as you go up island. So it's remarkable who you see in there, especially July and August. It's incredible. On the outskirts of this town, for many years, Michael J. Fox has had a home. He loves it here. A famous woman from journalism had a large estate on the outskirts of town. Her name was Katharine Graham. She owned the Washington Post. And there was a movie about her life in recent years. Meryl Streep played the role. The film was The Post. Excellent film. Powerful lady. This forest that we're starting to drive through, this is what gives everyone their privacy that they so want on Martha's Vineyard. And this is a young forest. We know from the accounts in World War II that in those days the island was pretty much clear of trees, except for shade trees and things like that. These cleared fields were productive. They were full of agriculture and livestock because of all the water that we have. We'll talk more about how the forest left and came back as we go along. But that original forest was largely oak. And if you're building a community from scratch, oak is a very valuable thing. If you cut them down, you can build anything. But if you let the oak grow, it produces food. It produces acorns, which to us is kind of a novelty, wild, edible thing. But that was a major source of nutrition for most of human history, depending on the season, in both Europe and North America. It's one of the few foods that translated really well for those pilgrims. They had acorns in their diet back home. And of course the Wampanoag had acorns in their diet here. And very nutrient-dense food, actually. Up here in just a second on the right, we're going to see a field with one tree in the center of it. It's alone. It's the only oak tree left from the original forest. And it's a 500-year-old oak tree. I love old oak trees. They're so full of character and personality. Especially when those branches start going across the ground. Family owns that property. They take good care of it. I'm going to take you on a road here called Middle Road. And this is the backbone of the island. You can see some beautiful properties up here. I'm always surprised to be the only tour guide on Middle Road. And the reason it surprises me is because everybody on the island agrees that Middle Road is the most beautiful drive we have. So I think you're going to enjoy it. I enjoy it every time. You'll notice as we go along today that we're not very good at naming roads on Martha's Vineyard. We have Middle Road, North Road, South Road. It's a very New England thing. If you know the name of the road, you're not lost. It's real straightforward. I think there's a real charm to that. Now, I use the term up island and down island with you, and that's not as straightforward. I described it as the towns are down and the country's up, and that's true, but often when people say up in geography, they mean up north, and we don't mean that. In the colonial sense, the island was founded by English sailors, and if you're sailing and you're watching your charts, all those directions have number values. As you go east, those numbers go down or decrease. As you go west, the numbers increase or go up. And that's longitude, and we're an east-west island. So just like the numbers, east is down and west is up. And we get directions that way here. We have 4 directions. We have north and south and up and down. So if anybody gives you directions like that, just clarify with them. It can be really counterintuitive. I'm going to show you where our county fair is held here. Martha's Vineyard Island is Dukes County, and the Dukes County Fair is the biggest social event of the year, by far. We just had it again. It's the last week of August, and we had it again this year. We were thrilled to get it back. Traditional county fair. We've got a lot of organic farms here, a lot more livestock than you'd think. We even have a iron frying pan throwing contest for ladies, which is very competitive. Now here's the view. This is the centerpiece for the fairground. This building's just wonderful. And a great weather vane there, but it's just showing us its rear end at the moment. Because that's the way the wind is blowing, I guess. But that's a Tuck and Holland weather vane, that same company that I showed you. This is a copper cow. I love to take pictures of these weather vanes here. There's always a theme or a backstory to them. And I know of one weather vane. It's on a home in the middle of nowhere on the island. And it's the family dog. And it's a golden retriever. And it's got a bright blue ball in its mouth. And it's so detailed that you can tell the dog just jumped out of the water retrieving the ball. But the detail's not in the wetness of the dog. The detail's in the joy of the dog. It's a sculpture. It's a remarkable detail. And when a big storm comes to the island, we take these down. When winter comes, most of them are down. But they're still up. So I'm going to show you some as we go along. But when you're not with me, look for the weather vanes on Martha's Vineyard. It's a really fun and interesting detail to keep your eyes open for. Now, Martha's Vineyard Island has a few nicknames. Some people call it the Rock, which is a pretty common nickname for an island. Within the island, we call it the Island of Misfit Toys. And that's what we call each other. It's also known as Hollywood East because of all the celebrities that live here. And they live up here in this part of the island. So, beautiful day. Not as many people left on the island anymore. But if you see somebody out and about, just look at them. You never know who it might be. The people I've seen the most in recent weeks are Seth Meyers and Bill Murray. And it's normal this time of year to see him quite a bit. I see Jake Gyllenhaal jogging around from time to time. His family's owned a home here for 40 years, so he grew up summering here. I see Larry David riding his bike around too. There was a story in the gossip columns recently about Larry David and Alan Dershowitz yelling at each other at a local store about politics, of course. So we're going to drive past that store. Those guys have known each other for 30-some years. Funny story. Now this is Middle Road. You'll see why this is my favorite here shortly. In 1642, we got our first pilgrims on Martha's Vineyard. There were 40 couples. They were led by Thomas Mayhew. There's some small families too. Our pilgrims are different than the others. The earlier waves of pilgrims came to New England and grabbed land. There were skirmishes associated with that. It didn't take that many years for wars, larger conflicts to break out. Of course, as Europeans went west across the Americas, that was a violent expansion. That didn't happen here. There's no record of conflict between the cultures on Martha's Vineyard. This guy, Thomas Mayhew, was a missionary, and he wanted to convert these folks. So he decided to treat them well, which is a unique approach in those days. So we didn't have the killing and the cheating and the stealing. Still colonialism, but different experience for both the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. And I'll give that more context as we go along. Look left. Beautiful farm here. That lake at the bottom of this whole property is a freshwater lake in the middle of the ocean. And beautiful stone fences. These are field stones left over by the glacier, mostly heavy granite. Notice there's no mortar. These are just stacked on each other. And this type of stone wall isn't unique to us. You see it in Ireland and other places. But we have hundreds of miles of these. So we're going to see beautiful stuff on both sides of the road here, folks, on the road. This guy, Thomas Mayhew, the leader of the community, has a living descendant. And it's just kind of fun, so I bring it up. The singer-songwriter Taylor Swift is directly descended from Thomas Mayhew. Now, when he was alive, Thomas Mayhew's right-hand man was Peter Folger. And Folger was the educator of the island and a linguist. He became fluent in Wampanoag very early on. He was a poet and a surveyor and a very forward-thinking man. He championed a couple philosophies in this group that took hold, and these ideas were all based on conversion to Christianity, of course, but if a family in the Wampanoag tribe converted, they could intermarry with the Pilgrims in the 1600s. And the little boys from the converted family would be educated with the English boys. And because of that, some of the very early Harvard grads are Wampanoag men from Martha's Vineyard. The most well-known of this group is Caleb. Caleb was the son of the chief on West Chop, that West Peninsula I showed you. He was a student of Folger's, and he was in the Harvard class of 1665. And there's a book about his life, Caleb's Crossing, which is historic fiction, very popular book right now. Now, there were Wampanoag here, Nantucket, Cape Cod. They're coastal Massachusetts people, related to the Algonquin, which is a bigger tribe, more widely known. The oldest book in the Harvard Library is a Bible, not in English. It's in the tribal language, translated by the tribe, for the tribe, used in recent decades to revive their language. Living document for them because of that. Because of his language skills, Peter Folger had a couple fingerprints on this, but really the tribe did it. This guy, Peter Folger, has an interesting set of descendants. As you might suspect, Folger's coffee came from his kin, which is many generations later, and that's kind of fun. But his grandson is a founding father. Peter Folger's grandson is Benjamin Franklin. And that's going way back. In the famous autobiography of Ben Franklin, he writes about Peter Folger and Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. Very similar men. Similar personalities and intelligence. When the Pilgrims came to the land here, they didn't steal it, they purchased it. And we believe that was actually fair based on the relationship. But the Pilgrims were farmers. They got the land like this and cut down the trees to build structures and burned the land to get rid of all the scrub. And it's a rocky soil, so they dug up all these rocks, laid them in lines, and built their stone fences. Some of the stone fences we're going to see today are original property lines from the 1640s. That first spring was busy, cutting and burning and digging and stacking and planting. The second spring, they came back and thought most of that hard work was done. So they dug in the soil to plant the seeds, and they were surprised to find a whole new harvest of stones. They didn't anticipate that. It kind of baffled them. As they dug them up, though, they figured out what was going on. They figured that since they were such godly men, Satan must be pushing stones directly up from hell to frustrate their honest hard work. So they dug up those stones and called them the stones from Hades. And they were the last ones out of the ground, so they're the top ones on the stone wall. And we still call the top layer of any stone wall the stones from Hades. That's a terrible place to walk. Now, this wall up here is unusually tall. In the old days, they would have called this a hog-tied, horse-high wall. This is modern, by the way, but the technique is ancient. There's no mortar, it's just stacked stones. And notice how uniform the stones from Hades are on this one. This is a work of art, in my opinion, and fully functional. But, a lot of those stones are called two-handers, which obvious implication is you can lift it up on the wall, but many of those are much bigger than two-handers. Being a stonemason is still an active vocation on this island. And then we're going to dip down here and climb a little bit. We're going to get near the high point of the island, just kind of in the neighborhood of the high point, which is, for us, only 300 feet above sea level. I don't know if you guys have